Well, good morning. Welcome to April. I'm glad you could be able to join us on this Sunday morning. If you were to make a list of the most unique places in Upper Michigan, the Grand Hotel would be high on that list. This morning we'll find out more about it from the man in charge. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, Dan Musser III is a member of the family that has been part of the Grand Hotel for much of its history. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Dan started working at the hotel in high school, raking sand traps on the Jewel. He has been a bellhop, bartender, front desk clerk, front desk manager, reservations manager, vice president, and now president. Among his many industry and community activities, he served as chairman of the Michigan Hotel, Motel, and Resort Association, also served on the Michigan Travel Commission as an alderman for the city of Mackinac Island, member of the board of the Mackinac Island Tourism Bureau, and a member of the Mackinac Bridge Authority. A pleasure to welcome Dan Musser back to the Ryan Report.
Well, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you back. As I was mentioning before, you were here in 2006, so a lot has happened since then.
A lot has happened since then, that's
the
truth.
We talked about the history then, but I'd like to cover a little more of it again because it's so interesting, and I know we have new members of our audience. But it really had kind of humble beginnings, didn't it, when it first started up?
Yes, it did. And it's interesting that, like the Canadian hotels, the railroad company and the two steamship companies that built the hotel really had no desire to be in the hotel business per se. They just wanted to create a new spot to haul people to. And so I guess fortunately or unfortunately for our family, they got out of it pretty quick. Then we entered eventually in the 1934, my great uncle got full ownership.
And at that time, you had mentioned, I think the last time we talked, that for much of its life it didn't make any money. So he must have had some good expectations for the hotel.
It struggled really until after the Second World War. He did a couple things that I think changed the projection of the viability of the business. And one was he was able to see that travel was going to change after the war, that with cars that worked, roads that were passable, that the idea of these wealthy individuals coming from Chicago and Grand Rapids and Cincinnati coming up with their staff and their steamer trunks for the season, that kind of travel was going to end with airplane travel and cars that worked, and it was going to shrink. And so he saw an opportunity that others didn't, and he also started taking conventions at that time, and all of his peers from around the country said, "You're crazy, Stuart. You're going to scare away that great old guest that comes for the summer." And he could see that great old guest, which they were, that type of travel was going to go away. And so a lot of those groups that he booked right after the war were fortunate enough to still serve today and really form kind of the backbone of our business. And we would be hard-pressed to be viable without those.
And I know your father eventually took ownership of the hotel.
He did.
And you and he worked together for a long time, and I know he passed away about 5 years ago.
He did, yes.
But you had a long time working relationship, didn't you, with your dad?
I did, and it was such a great privilege, and obviously my mentor in so many ways. But I started the day after I graduated from Albion College in 1986 and haven't left.
I had a comment I noted from former Governor Blanchard talking about the fact that your dad and your family has done more for tourism in Michigan than about anyone.
Well, I would say that Governor Blanchard is part of that too. He really upped the ante from Governor Milliken's Say Yes to Michigan, and then I would say that through on all the way up to Governor Snyder, they've all been very helpful in that. But that's very nice the governor say that.
And another article I read pointed out that your father would greet people when they came in the dining room and write notes to employees if things weren't just going right.
And I do that today.
You do that today?
Which I learned from him. And and management by walking around does work. And I think it's important in a family-owned place for guests to see us and be accessible, but also our staff members and hopefully have them treat it as it's their home like we try to.
This place is so unique, in Michigan history and even in American history. Is it kind of a heavy weight to carry on your shoulders that you have to carry this tradition on?
Yes and no. There is a time, usually right about now, I'm going to Mackinac tomorrow and to inspect some of the things that we've done over the winter, and I always think I can't see a guest as far as I can see. We don't have our staff yet, and I go in our big dining room that seats 1,000 people. with the sheets overhang, and I think, what are we doing? Are we crazy? But you know, as staff starts showing up, and fortunately guests do, it comes alive, and no, that burden goes away, and we just work hard at doing what we do.
I was reading another article which said, one of the reasons that Grand Hotel is such a great place is because you and your family have, it's been your interest. You don't own a chain of hotels. You're not looking over a hotel conglomerate. You're focused on one hotel.
You know, we've over the years looked at opportunities in Chicago, elsewhere in the island, and elsewhere in Southern America, and we just always kind of come back to, let's stick to our knitting and do what we do. And now we have expanded on the island with new venues, which I think have been a great addition. But no, we've pretty much stuck to what we do.
What do you see as your highest priority for you personally?
Maintaining and getting the best possible staff we can. In recent years, we use about half of our staff are foreign nationals, and the current administration has been very difficult to deal with that, even though the president uses the program at his Mar-a-Lago hotel, which I think we all know he loves and cherishes. So we're working through that, and fortunately we're fully complemented with our staff this year. But looking ahead, we have some headwinds that I'm going to address.
Yeah, that really has to be one of the major challenges. I was looking just for the fun of it. The total population of Mackinac Island, Mackinac City, and St. Ignace is less than 4,000 people. And in a conversation, we decided that they employ almost that many people in the hospitality industry. And of course, that 4,000 number includes babies and retirees.
Exactly.
So
well, there's about 500 year-round residents on Mackinac. Okay. We employ 750. So even if we employed everyone from baby to senior citizen, we still wouldn't have enough. Yeah.
So, okay, we'll talk some more about that in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on today's report after we take this break. Our guest this morning is Dan Musser. Dan is the president of the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. We were talking about employment and what a challenge it is every year to find, and especially for a business that operates roughly 6 months a year. That makes it even more challenging, I'm sure.
It is, and we're 300 plus miles away from the closest major metropolitan area, Detroit, and so to ask individuals to come leave their homes for their communities for half the year and then go back it's a challenge. And fortunately, it's one we've been able to work through the years, and we've found that if we get you for 2 summers, we generally get you for about a decade.
Okay.
Now we have some longer term staff as well, have been with us some as long as 30 years, but if we can maintain that, we can still provide the level of service that we're proud of and we want to do.
And I do recall, I think from a previous conversation, that you mentioned you have more employee rooms than you have guest rooms.
We have about 600 employee rooms and 393 guest rooms.
Wow. Which
is kind of when I go to industry meetings around the country, I kind of throw that out there and they'll look at me.
No one else has something like that. No. Let's talk about it. You're about to embark on a new season. How do you determine, when the season begins?
Well, the season begins when the first guest walks in the door.
But you
the first paying guest.
You kind of decide when that's going to be, don't you?
We do. We set it on what we can book. This year we're having a soft opening end of April, and then we'll fully open May 4th. And that depends on what we can book and what we think we can fill up. And fortunately, the season looks very strong. We have more rooms I'd like to sell in September right now, but we have some time to work on that.
You had mentioned, your uncle kind of being a trailblazer in the idea of conventions and things. Mm-hmm. I assume those are still very important to you and to the Grand Hotel.
They're just almost 60% of our business, and obviously, and also come at the shoulder seat, beginning and end of the season, that we'd be hard pressed to find, the individual traveler coming. So it's really vital to our business, right. and a lot of those kind of an offshoot of, if someone comes up for their business meeting, then they might come back later in the summer with their family or spouse.
For some people, it's probably cost prohibitive.
Yes.
To stay at the Grand Hotel, but you have made some special options available, haven't you?
We have, particularly since the downturn, which was in between our last discussion. I came up with a plan to do called Celebrate Michigan and offer to Michigan citizens at our lowest rate of the year, and that's become very popular both in the spring and the fall, and we'll have 1,500 anyway guests, maybe closer to 2,000 guests in the spring and fall that take advantage of that. Might not be able to afford to come in July and August, but they get to experience the Grand Hotel experience.
And you've also come up with kind of a bed and breakfast option on a limited basis.
We have, yes.
And that again is a little special rate because people aren't paying for dinner unless they choose to.
That's right. And now with our various options outside the main dining room, it's a good way to go. You know, if you want to, we found that almost all of our guests end up at least one night in the dining room, because my dad always said it doesn't cost a dime to make our guests put a coat and tie on, but it changes the atmosphere in that room. And I don't think in a stuffy way, but a kind of a celebratory way. But our outside restaurants are all casual and a variety of offerings, and so that is a good way for a lot of guests to go with that.
I was going to ask you, do you get pressure to change that policy of dressing for dinner?
No, we don't.
No?
No, we don't. And it's interesting in today's world with casual Fridays, and you know, if you fly anywhere, no one's wearing a coat and tie anymore, and so it's kind of unique. But it fits us, I think.
You must have quite a management organization too to make everything work there.
We do.
Besides,
I have a great core of department heads and vice presidents that have been with me for quite a while now. Our managing director, Ken Hayward, started with me pretty much right out of school, right out of college. He came from U of M, I came from Albion. And we have head of conventions, head of accommodations, our department heads, our housekeeper, our chef, our maitre d', all have been with us for 20 plus years, and that makes a difference.
And you know, as you set out to make this work, you face some unique logistical problems being a very large hotel on an island that doesn't allow any motor vehicle traffic. What are the challenges that presents?
I've never known anything else, so to me it's normal. But yes, you know, we have refrigerated trucks coming every morning at 5 o'clock from St. Ignace to the island, and then kind of my arrangement with the various companies, the drayage companies, that we get kind of favored nation status, and that our stuff gets off first and it goes up the hill first, and then everyone else kind of gets serviced, and that's been a big help. And also bringing the refrigerated trucks to the island, that's been over a decade now, but that was a breakthrough, and that we can keep it refrigerated until the last possible moment, put it right on the dray with covered, you know, blankets, either hot or cold, and up to the hotel, and that's been a godsend.
And just so people don't misunderstand, those trucks aren't driving on the island; they're just parked on the dock.
They park on the dock, which is owned by the Iron Line, and they can do that legally on the island. They just couldn't drive onto the city street. Then there would be a problem.
Then there'd be a problem. Okay, I've got some more questions for you. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more in just 2 minutes. Our guest this morning is Dan Musser, president of the Grand Hotel. You know, one of the things that people probably don't realize is the efforts you've gone through to actually make some changes, to add some capacity, I guess, and yet maintain the historic charm. That has to be very challenging.
There's a fine line there between, I think, improving and making this iconic structure better and meet the needs of the traveling public of today, but also keeping in mind that it is an iconic image and structure, and we have to be mindful of that. And we have added in recent years cupolas on the 4th floor that originally were on the 3rd floor of the original hotel. Okay. And so if you look at old photos and you look at the current hotel, you almost don't even realize what you're looking at, that there's another floor there. And so we've tried to be sensitive that way in all areas. But we've added TVs, we've added Wi-Fi, we've done some things
you have to do to stay. Yeah.
Air conditioning.
Certainly one of the charming things about the Grand is the flowers and the gardens.
Very much so.
You put a lot of effort into that, I'm sure.
I do. My sister's in charge of that, and she does a wonderful job. The gardens outside, but also all the cut flowers inside that we have throughout the parlor and the hotel, I think really does make a difference.
Do you maintain your own stables and your own teams of horses?
We do. We own, I guess, 8 Irish hackneys that we use for kind of honeymoon couples and heads of conventions and that kind of stuff. And then we lease the big draft horses to run our what we call buses. They're opera buses, right, which are turn-of-the-century carriages, to pick up guests at the docks and bring up to the hotel and back.
Okay.
And those, I guess we have 2, 4, 6, 8 of ththose we lease from Mackinac Carriage Tours.
That would be another thing that other hotel managers aren't faced with, probably. Where do you find most of your guests are coming from now? And has that changed over the years?
It has, and Pure Michigan's helped that expand our brand and our reach. But basically, if you do a big circle around the Great Lakes, that's the majority of our guests. And then New York, New Jersey's a good market. Florida, but I kind of think that's Michigan annex a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of transplants. Texas is a great market for us. I think to escape the heat, and maybe our Americana sells, I don't know, but we do well there. And then California, just the sheer size of California, I think we're getting the stuff falling off the crumbs falling off the table.
You can't go to Mackinac Island without realizing there are a lot of foreign visitors there.
Yes.
Are you getting foreign visitors attracted to the Grand Hotel?
More as day guests than overnight, which of course we welcome and are great. But we haven't cracked the overnight part of it yet.
Do you ever get concerned about maintaining the allure of Mackinac Island itself? Are there ever any challenges there?
Well,
do you all get along? Let's put it that way. The residents, the businesses, the local and state government.
I think there's a healthy competition between all of us, and yet we all know what makes Mackinac special, and it's not any one of us. The Fort is a big part of that. Mackinac Carriage Tours is a big part of that. Grand Hotel's a big part of that, as well as the fudge shops are. And I think, like I said, I think there's a healthy competition between all of us, and that's good, but also there's respect for what makes Mackinac so special, and I think as long as we maintain that, which we've been pretty good at so far, I'd like to think we can continue that.
I've noticed large homes being built on Mackinac Island.
Yes.
So that has to be a challenge in itself for those people with the logistical issues.
Well, of course, the change is now. I mean, when like the house I live in was built in the year after the hotel was, we winterize it because we're up there a lot in the winter. But all those other big Victorian homes, for the most part, aren't. But whereas the new ones are, and as the economy has changed and people can work up from afar, we have a lot more maybe second career individuals that are retiring or not retiring but still working but out of their home and on the Mackinac year round.
Okay. We've talked about how important family has been. Are there future generations of the family that may be interested?
Well, we have 6 children, so I'd like to think one of them will have the aptitude. Well, they're all brighter than I am, so they're fine there. Hopefully one of them will have the interest. Our oldest is in college, and she's interested in social work, so I don't know if that'll be a fit for her. Maybe it would be, I don't know. And then our youngest is just in preschool, so we'll see. But hopefully one of them.
Anybody out there raking the sand traps in the golf course?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. We'll have 3 of our kids working at the hotel this summer in various spots.
And so we can look forward to, you think, a good summer at the Grand Hotel?
I think we're well booked. We have more space than I'd like in September to sell, but we have a little time to work on that. But no, every indication is that we're going to have a good year.
Okay. Well, as I said at the beginning, it's just such a unique place, and it's so interesting to learn about all that goes into keeping it that way. Thanks very much for coming in and talking with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. I'll be back with some other thoughts for you after we take a break. You know, as we get older, life changes around us, and although we sometimes think about change as unpleasant, that's not always the case. Let me give you a few examples, and I should point out that for those who are a little older, this will just be a reminder of how things used to be, while others may be surprised to learn how it was in a different era. For example, do you remember when you couldn't buy any building materials, even a board for a household project, after 12 noon on a Saturday? That's when all the lumber yards closed and didn't reopen until Monday morning. If you worked all week and wanted to spend the weekend working on a project, you better figure out what you needed and get to the lumber yard before noon on Saturday, or you were out of luck. I also remember the days when the larger supermarkets in town closed at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening and didn't open again until Monday morning. Most communities had some neighborhood stores that could get you through the weekend with the basics, but if you wanted to get to the big supermarket, you wouldn't find them open on Sunday. Speaking of being in the supermarket or any store, remember when you paid for your purchase with cash? We rarely see that anymore. Today it's all about plastic, the credit card. And look how that process has changed from the days, remember they had to run your card through a device that imprinted your name and other data on the paper form? Today it's pretty much zip zip and away you go. How about the handwritten letter? When's the last time you actually got an actual letter in the mail? Not a bill or some advertising flyer, but an actual personal letter. Most of us, it just doesn't happen in this day and age of emails, texting, and social media. Of course, I was never good at writing letters anyway. Do you remember when making a long-distance call was a big deal? You didn't do it often because it cost too much. If possible, you waited to make those calls in the evening or on weekends because the rates were lower. The other question you had to consider was whether to make it a person-to-person call, which cost more but had one important benefit. There was nothing worse than calling to talk with a specific person and having someone else answer the phone because the person you really wanted to talk to wasn't home. If you didn't pay the extra charge for a person-to-person call, you had to pay anyway. It was like throwing money away. Life does change, and we don't always know what will be next. I like to tell my grandchildren, when I was a kid, we didn't have video games, social media, or the internet. In fact, we didn't even have a television set because TV hadn't arrived yet in Upper Michigan. People used to sit around the living room looking at the floor model radio and listening to the sounds coming out of the speaker. We've come a long way to be able to get together like this on a Sunday morning. I'll be back in a minute. Before the Today Show gets here, let me remind you once again that this show is also available each week at UpperMichiganSource.com. The most recent show starting at about noon on Monday. Past episodes are available now. Thanks to Dan Musser for joining us this morning. Getting some insights about the Grand Hotel is always an interesting story. And thank you for being here. Let's get together again next Sunday morning.